Now, witness the full power of this fully operational spoiler review. After the events of The Force Awakens, Rey finds Luke Skywalker and tries to convince him to train her in the ways of the Jedi, as well as to come back and reignite the spark of hope in the galaxy. Meanwhile, the Resistance desperately attempts to escape as they are relentlessly pursued by the First Order, led by Supreme Leader Snoke and his apprentice Kylo Ren. With a budget between $200 and $317 million, the film was written and directed by Rian Johnson. The Last Jedi is the 8th film in the Star Wars Skywalker saga, the 2nd film in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and the 8th Star Wars film produced by Lucasfilm. Oh yeah, and it's also the 3rd Star Wars movie distributed by Walt Disney Motion Pictures. When the film was released on the 14th of December 2017, it received rave reviews from critics, scoring a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes and grossing $1.3 billion worldwide, becoming the highest grossing film of 2017 and the 9th highest grossing film of all time. The Last Jedi also went on to receive 4 nominations at the 90th Academy Awards, including Best Original Score and Best Visual Effects. Sounds pretty good, right? Right? Well, apparently not, because aside from a certain movie that may or may not have come out last year, The Last Jedi is by far the most divisive film in the Skywalker saga, which can be shown in the massive divide between the audience and critic scores on Rotten Tomatoes. This debate about whether or not The Last Jedi is a good movie, or whether or not it ruined Star Wars, or whether or not it ruined your childhoods, or whether or not Rian Johnson ruined the film by subverting expectations for the sake of subverting expectations, or whether or not you're truly a Star Wars fan for liking or disliking the film, is an argument that's been going on since it came out, and it still hasn't stopped. So my goal here is to give my honest thoughts on the movie without giving a flying shit about anyone who thinks I'm not being a true Star Wars fan for liking or disliking one single film in an 11-movie saga. Let's get down to business. Is this movie perfect? No, it's far from it. Do I still love this movie though? Yes. Yes, I freaking love this movie. Hate me yet? Good, because I'm not done. First off, I'm gonna say that for the most part, I dig the characters. I like Rey in this movie, as well as in the other 2 movies in this trilogy. I know a lot of people will hear me say this and immediately turn the video off, but please just hear me out. Daisy Ridley's performance is phenomenal. She does such an amazing job playing this character, and I really love that Rey's arc in this movie is centered on her realizing that nothing is what it seems and realizing that things are not gonna go the way she thinks. For example, she walks up to Luke Skywalker at the beginning of the film to hand his lightsaber back to him, a lightsaber that he lost years ago. She expects him to be this all-powerful Jedi Master who will willingly train her in the ways of the Force. Not what happens. Instead, Luke chucks his lightsaber over his shoulder and practically down a hill, after which he secludes himself in his home and initially refuses to train Rey. He even refuses to come back and help the Resistance fight the First Order, claiming that he can't just face down the entire First Order, implying that he isn't all-powerful. We also see this when Rey tries to turn Kylo Ren back to the light side, and for a while we're made to think that he will, considering he kills Snoke and helps fight off the Praetorian Guards. But then it's revealed that he has no intentions of turning, and instead tries to turn Rey over to his side. Both of those create conflict for Rey as she begins to wonder who she can really trust. Kylo Ren seems to care for Rey, but he also has his own intentions, and Luke eventually agrees to give her 3 lessons about the Jedi, but he doesn't trust her because of how immensely powerful Rey is, and her trust is shaken even further when it's revealed that Luke and Ren are telling different versions of the same story, so there is conflict in terms of who she can really trust. I also love that Rey is a nobody in this movie. We all expected Rey to be related to someone. She could have been related to Luke, Han, Obi-Wan, Porkins, etc. But in this movie, it's revealed that she's just a regular person, until The Rise of Skywalker came and threw this out the window. I love this twist because it challenges our perception of what a Star Wars story is and how it is told. I love this idea of the Force flowing strongly in a random person because it adds mysticism and power back into the whole concept of the Force. Many before me have said this already, but I feel I need to say this to get my point across. Conceptually, the Force shouldn't really give a shit about who you're related to. This makes the Force intriguing and spiritual again. It also creates this amazing contrast between Rey and Kylo Ren, because you've got Kylo Ren, who descended from literal legends, and yet he turned to the dark side, and then you've got Rey, who came from nothing, and is now the galaxy's new hope. That leads me to my favorite part of this whole trilogy, that being Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren is one of the best villains of recent memory, and part of the reason I am just so enthralled by this character is because of how conflicted he is. He wants to be on the dark side of the Force so badly, but he feels a constant pull to the light, suggesting that he really shouldn't be on the dark side of the Force. However, a new layer is added to that conflict due to the fact that he killed his father Han Solo in the last film. The deed tore him apart when he thought it would help him fully embrace the dark side, which introduces a new conflict within himself on whether or not he has what it takes to sacrifice those he cares about to get what he wants. I love that scene where Kylo is flying towards the Resistance ship, knowing that Leia, his mother, is on it, and when they feel each other through the Force. I can't get enough of the way it cuts back and forth between Kylo Ren and Leia, because it not only implies that they still care about each other, but the fact that Kylo Ren in this small moment chooses not to kill Leia is a small but significant sign that there is still good in this guy. This can also be seen by the fact that Kylo Ren is often shot from the left or is positioned in the left-hand side of the frame, and in terms of the left and right-wing views, left typically represents good. Adam Driver gives such a damaged and conflicted portrayal of this character that every time the dude is even on screen, my eyes are locked on that screen. I also love the connection that is created between Kylo Ren and Rey because it also serves as their biggest contrast. Kylo Ren is a dark side Force wielder who is struggling with the temptation of the light side, and you could argue that the light side of the Force is personified by Rey, who is trying to get Kylo Ren to turn back to the light side of the Force. Similarly, but also differently, Rey is a light side Force wielder that is struggling with the temptation of the dark side, and you could say that the dark side of the Force is personified by Kylo Ren, which would be a very obvious assumption to make, because, I mean, look at him. To further convey this, Rey is often shot from the right or in the right-hand side of the frame, suggesting that Rey does have the potential to be super evil and that the dark side of the Force is both figuratively and literally calling to her. Both of these characters are working at each other and trying to get into each other's heads, which is awesome because it brings these characters closer together while also creating more conflict between them. So it's time to talk about what I'm fairly certain is the most controversial part of this movie. That being Luke Skywalker. A lot of people have talked about how they really hate his portrayal in this movie because he seems very out of character, and personally, I strongly disagree. Yes, he is a different person to who he was in the original trilogy, considering it's revealed that he literally tried to kill Ben Solo, which was what finally made Ben Solo turn to the dark side. However, this subplot is honestly one of the best parts of the movie. Plus, Luke even says that this was a fleeting thought, and immediately afterwards he felt nothing but shame and regret. I love this because it shows that Luke is a wise guy, but he's not perfect. Luke is struggling with his status as not only a Jedi, but a living legend. Hell, he even resents it for most of the movie, stating that he failed Ben Solo and is the reason he turned to the dark side and became Kylo Ren. I love that this creates realistic flaws in Luke as a character because it's these flaws that help to enforce the themes of heroism that we see in Luke's arc, as well as give the character some truly incredible growth. Due to the intervention of Master Yoda, Luke learns to accept his failures rather than run from them. He chooses to embrace them and learn from them. He realizes that being a hero is a tool that can be used to rally others together. This is later shown when you see the kids that appeared earlier in the film on Canto Bight talking about how Luke stood up to an entire army on his own, something that he said he wasn't going to do in the beginning of the film. That's fucking amazing writing! I love that as soon as Luke enters the Battle of Crate, nobody else in the movie dies. That's how a Jedi should operate. Jedi are supposed to be peacekeepers and they do everything in their power to save lives. Luke does this by putting literally everything he's got into one final effort to fight against evil. He projects himself to the Resistance and Kylo Ren so that he can distract Kylo Ren and the First Order long enough for the Resistance to escape, and it kills him. His death in front of the twin suns is one of the most moving and emotional death scenes I have ever seen. Not only because it harkens back to the scene in Star Wars 77 when he looks on at the twin suns on Tatooine, but also because Luke dies knowing that he will not be the last Jedi, as well as knowing that he made one last heroic act that brought hope back into the galaxy. Although I do find myself wondering if what he did was so impossibly powerful that it killed him, or if he willingly gave himself up to the Force in peace, therefore choosing to die and letting himself go. Either way, it's a really powerful scene, especially with the wide shot of the sun. sons. This story gives him a new character arc to explore that is fully defined and where new depths of the character are explored, and I love it. Now let's talk about the second most controversial thing about this movie, that being the Force. This movie explores things about the Force that up until this point had never been explored in any Star Wars movie or show before. One such thing is the Force connection between Kylo Ren and Rey, in which Rey and Kylo Ren suddenly realize they can feel and see each other in each other's environments. And in one case, Kylo Ren is talking to Rey, who is stood in a rain, and Kylo Ren actually brings back some rainwater with him. He wipes his head, and on his glove is some rainwater. The first hint that it's possible to transfer matter through the Force from one location to the other. Personally, I love the Force connection between Kylo Ren and Rey, not just because it's a new ability or aspect of the Force that I find absolutely fascinating, but it's also because it results in some great interactions between these characters, giving their connection more depth and creating this idea that these characters are connected even though they are billions of miles apart from each other, both literally as well as in ideologies. I love that every time these two talk to each other through the Force, Kylo Ren is stood in front of or surrounded by more metallic and dark-colored imagery representing the dark side of the Force, whereas Rey is always stood in front of or surrounded by more natural imagery on the island of Arc 2, and colors like green, brown, yellow, which is symbolic of the light side of the Force. This concept of Force projection is expanded upon when Luke shows up at the end to fight Kylo Ren, and it's revealed that he has projected himself to that location and he isn't actually there, as well as the fact that he has changed his appearance to make himself look younger. His hair is shorter and darker like it used to be. He basically projects himself as what Kylo Ren, for example, remembers him as, or perhaps even the way Leia remembers him, so what he looked like the last time those characters saw him. I've always been intrigued as to why exactly Luke did that. Was it specifically for Leia, so that she could see him one last time the way she remembers him, as opposed to how old and rumpled he's become? I'm 80% sure that's why he did it, purely because Leia is the first person he talks to when he gets to Crate and apologizes to her for what happened to her son. And I love that scene not only because it's a really sweet and heartstring-tugging scene, but also because the idea that Luke changed his appearance for her, knowing that this was the last time he would ever see her in the land of the living, makes that scene all the more emotional and sweet. I also love that when Luke is taking on Kylo Ren, Luke never leaves the red footprints and skid marks under the salt, foreshadowing that Luke is not actually there and is in fact a projection, whereas Kylo Ren is leaving those red footprints and skid marks every single time he moves. I keep looking at his feet every single time he moves and he never leaves one single red footprint. That's a great little detail, and it holds up on multiple viewings. I don't have a problem with any of the new things that are introduced or explored regarding the Force. I like it because it deepens and expands the mythology of the Jedi by showing that there are other things that the Jedi can do. That's the exact same reason I like Force powers like lifting objects with the Force, which we saw in The Empire Strikes Back, and the Force Push, which we saw in The Phantom Menace. Those are cool not just because they're part of canon now, but also because, like the Force powers introduced in The Last Jedi, they expand and deepen the mythology. But speaking of the Jedi, this movie does introduce a really intriguing argument that I had never thought about before I saw this movie. The Jedi aren't these perfect heroes. They don't do everything right. They've made mistakes, and Luke thinks that it's time for the Jedi to end. I love this because 1, it's unexpected, and 2, because this point of view has now been addressed, it kind of makes me want to watch the prequels from that point of view, and it basically establishes the Jedi as something that can be seen through multiple points of view. Oh no, it's making me want to watch the prequels! Still somewhat on the topic of the Force, let's talk about Leia. As many of you know, this is the last performance that Carrie Fisher ever gave as this character before she passed away. May she rest in peace. And she's amazing! She's the best part of the Resistance scenes by far, and I could not get enough of her when she was on screen. This is without a doubt one of the best performances she has ever given as this character. Also, interestingly, we finally get to see her use the Force. In The Empire Strikes Back, she had a connection with Luke, and that's how she found him on Cloud City. But in this movie, we actually get to see her use the Force to save herself when she is sucked into space after the bridge of the Resistance ship is blown up by the TIE fighters. I think this scene makes perfect sense, because for one, if a Jedi, or any Force user for that matter, can use the Force to pull something towards them, then surely they can use the Force to pull themselves towards other objects, e.g. ships they need to escape from the vacuum of space. Some people have said that she is flying. She's not. She's in space. The definition of the word is literally moving or being able to move through the air. Do you think there is any air in space? Anyway, I like that Leia is more powerful or more attuned to what she can do because 1, it makes sense, and 2, it arguably shows a growth in her character from what she could do in the original trilogy in terms of power to what she can do in this movie. And it was cool to see the idea that Leia is Force sensitive expanded upon. One of the biggest reasons I loved this movie so much when I first saw it is because it's subverted my expectations in a really good way. Personally, when I go to see a Star Wars movie, I like to see the unexpected. I don't want to go in and watch a Star Wars movie that is predictable to the point of boredom. Hence why I still stand by my love for the subversion of expectations in The Last Jedi. Every subversion in this movie services the plot in a meaningful way that propels the story forward. For example, the death of Snoke. I am perfectly okay with Snoke biting the dust the way he did because Snoke was never the main antagonist of this movie, or The Force Awakens for that matter. It's Kylo Ren. Snoke's death pushes Kylo Ren's development further. Luke being a grumpy asshole instead of a wise Jedi Master that is willing to train Rey on the spot is effective because it gives Luke a new arc and further depth to his character. And the same can be said about Rey being a nobody. Hell, one of my favorite subversions is basically an entire character arc, that being Poe's arc. Poe is a flyboy, definitely a hotshot, which is spelled out for us a grand total of 3 billion times by Admiral Holdo, played by Laura Dern. We're led to believe that Holdo is doing the wrong thing by continuously running from the First Order in a ship that's running out of fuel fast, seemingly without a plan. Partly because of that fact, and also because Poe is running around telling everyone, "She's wrong! Only I know what to do! Listen to me!" In these situations, when that character, Poe, is alone, you'd root for him because the film leads you to believe that he's right. And then you'd think by the end that character is proven right, and then everyone who doubted them is like, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry we didn't believe you, oh. Not what happens. Poe is positive that what he's saying is right. He thinks that the Resistance need to attack and that they're not going to make it unless they do so. He is so positive that he's right that he's willing to take command from Holdo. He's so positive that he's right that he tries to commit a mutiny, and it's at this moment that you realize he was wrong. Because after Leia stuns him, he wakes up on a transport ship, where it's revealed that there was a plan, and he almost ruined it. That's a pretty clever and unique way of going about a side plot / character arc like that. In the beginning, Poe gets in trouble with Leia for basically going after the Dreadnought when she told him not to, resulting in the deaths of loads of other pilots. He has this violent side to him that makes him feel that he has to do this now, and in the process defy leadership. This comes back later when he has to take a step back and realize that he was wrong. In the film's climax, his arc comes full circle when Luke steps out onto the battlefield so that he can distract Kylo Ren and the First Order long enough for the Resistance to escape. Poe is the one who realizes that's what he's doing and basically realizes that shit doesn't always have to get blown up. There are other ways to win that mean more lives can be saved. I think that's a really cool arc. As I've said though, this movie isn't perfect. It's got its issues. One such issue being that Canto Bight stuff. The entire sequence should not have been in this movie at all. First off, the planet. Canto Bight. It's basically a casino planet, a very uninteresting one at that, because it just feels like a slightly futuristic Earth with some interesting looking people. Every single time I get to this part of the movie, it feels like the movie just stops and becomes this weird comedy, and then all of a sudden Finn and Rose have to free these animals, which introduces a really half-baked message about animal cruelty, just for good measure I guess. This entire subplot, it just doesn't work. In The Force Awakens, we see Finn learn to fight for the right thing, and in The Last Jedi, we see Finn learn to fight for the right thing again! Granted, John Boyega gives such a charming and likable performance as Finn that I enjoy seeing him whenever he's on screen, but there's basically no character growth for Finn because he's basically on character arc repeat. Then we've got Rose. For the record, Kelly Marie Tran gives a good performance as Rose. What I don't like is the character herself. She basically exists to give Finn a second love interest and to tell Finn that he should fight for the Resistance and war is super bad. That's it. She's telling Finn, the guy who quit the space Nazi military who turned him into a child soldier, that war is bad. Pretty freaking sure he already knows that war is bad! Benicio del Toro's character is also introduced in this subplot, and while del Toro does a lot with this character to make him stand out, the character just doesn't do anything. He's just this guy that is sometimes on their side and sometimes isn't, and the story just takes a massive detour just to find this guy who does nothing, and then betrays them. And I'm just sat there like, what was even the point of that? They also use this subplot to set up the confrontation between Finn and Captain Phasma. Slight problem being that Captain Phasma is is yet again underutilized, and while you could argue that there are some things in The Force Awakens that set this up directly, when it actually happens in this movie, it doesn't really feel satisfying because the conflict between these two characters isn't developed well and overall feels inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. They also use this shit I mean subplot to set up the moment where Rose actually kisses Finn. So you could say that Canto Bight is there so you can actually care about this? Slight problem though. Again, I didn't give a shit. It's made worse by the fact that Finn was about to sacrifice himself, and that moment was so powerful. I remember seeing that with a tear rolling down my cheek. It was just such an emotional moment. Rose saving him and then saying, "This is how we win, by saving those we love," or something like that, just killed the moment because it's cheesy, and I didn't feel a thing when they kissed. And hilariously, neither did Finn. Rose kisses him, and Finn's got this look like, oh, you just kissed me. We just kissed. You just kissed me. Okay. I'm pretty sure that Finn was thinking about Rey, considering when he wakes up in the beginning of the movie, Rey is the first thing he says. And also when he sees her at the end of the movie, he runs up to her and hugs her. Oh, Finn, you poor soul. I mean, there's also that thing with the kid who uses the Force to grab a broomstick, which admittedly is really intriguing, and I hope Johnson, Disney, or somebody does something with that in the future, but that's not enough to save Canto Bight. It sucks. There are themes in this movie that are more interesting than any of the themes in the other Star Wars movies. This movie has more to say about the idea of being a hero, mythology, the role of failure in our lives, and it even has something to say about choosing sides. The theme of failure being the greatest teacher is something that I thought was really interesting in terms of the way it was conveyed through the characters. You can see it through Luke when he comes to terms with his past and finally steps up to save the Resistance, and you can also see it through Poe when he takes a step back and realizes that there isn't always a violent solution. Another interesting theme for me was choosing sides in a conflict. For a start, you've got Rey and Kylo Ren, who are trying to get each other to switch sides, suggesting that there are only two sides in this conflict. Good versus evil, the light side versus the dark side, the Resistance versus the First Order. In contrast, you've got Luke, who wants the Jedi to end because of their failure to stop things such as Darth Sidious's rise to power and the creation of Darth Vader. Luke also refuses to fight the First Order on top of that, which could be viewed as Luke seeing a futility in choosing sides by saying that one way or another there is going to be conflict. When interpreted that way, you could say that Luke thinks that by not choosing a side, there will be no conflict. Later in the film, this idea is challenged when Kylo Ren tries to start his own empire with Rey that isn't related to the Sith, the Jedi, the Rebels, or the First Order for that matter, and basically just says that all of that should just die. However, Rey doesn't really want to do that, so this once again creates conflict between them. So despite Luke suggesting that there is a futility in choosing sides, Kylo Ren also suggests this directly to Rey, but this still creates conflict between them. That was definitely one of the more interesting themes. On the flip side of that, there's animal cruelty, which we see with the Fathiers, aka the Space Forces, and how badly they're treated by Miss Piggy. It doesn't really work because of how underdeveloped it is, and because it doesn't really relate to what else is going on in the movie, it kind of feels out of nowhere. There's also the theme of war profiteering, which does sound like an interesting idea. Hell, they even set up some really cool stuff when it's revealed that the Resistance buy weapons from arms dealers as well as the First Order. The problem is that it's addressed once and then never brought up again. So I really have to ask, why did you bring it up again? I also take issue with the comedy in this movie. I think out of all three of the sequels, The Last Jedi has the weakest humor. Sometimes it's just kinda cringy and unoriginal. I mean, the movie opens with a freaking yo mama joke. Other times, it's just weird, because sometimes the joke itself is decently funny, but because it's inappropriately misplaced, it doesn't work. For example, during the Battle of Crate, Kylo Ren and Hux are almost fighting each other for leadership. Hux is repeating everything that Kylo Ren says. He even goes, "Do you think you got him?" after Kylo Ren orders his men to just endlessly fire on Luke Skywalker, and then Kylo Ren just uses the Force to fling Hux into a control panel, knocking him out after he advises against going after Luke. The comedic conflict between Hux and Ren is decently funny on its own, but because it takes place in the final battle of the film, it kinda takes away from the tension of the scene. Aside from two shots that I think are genuinely terrible, The Last Jedi is tied with Rogue One as the best looking Star Wars movie. The shots in this movie are so beautiful. The visual effects and imagery is utterly gorgeous, not just in terms of how good it looks, but also because of how they convey the film's themes as well as the progression of the story and characters. Rian Johnson's direction of the action sequences is fantastic, particularly of the lightsaber combat. My favorite shots in any lightsaber fight are the wide shots where you can see the characters from head to toe, where you can see their entire bodies, as well as the choreography, and it is the definition of epic. The lightsaber fight wide shots in this movie are some of the most incredible wide shots I have ever seen, and the choreography itself is so well done. The lightsaber fights feel really energetic, but at the same time, I love the way the characters struggle. Sometimes they will stumble or they will do a move that will take a lot out of them, and it made the lightsaber fights themselves feel more real in a sense and more intense. One of my favorite action sequences in the entire saga is Rey and Kylo Ren versus the Praetorian Guard. It's not just the fast-paced choreography and the beautiful direction of the scene that gets me every single time. It's the fact that thematically, there's something going on. When you see Kylo Ren kill Snoke, you start thinking, oh, okay, so Kylo Ren's good now. Is he gonna team up with Rey? And because of that, you feel more invested in the battle. After the battle, it's revealed that Kylo Ren does want to side with Rey, but only so they can build their own empire together. And obviously, Rey doesn't really want to do that, so they're still against each other, and I love that. Another thing I love about the action sequences in this movie, in fact, this applies to pretty much all the action in The Last Jedi, but I love how brutal it is. There is a much stronger sense of brutality in this film, whether it's Rey getting slashed across the arm by a Praetorian Guard, or the Resistance ships literally getting shredded to pieces by the firepower of the First Order. This movie is a lot more brutal than a lot of the other movies, and I appreciate that because it adds tension and ups the stakes. The action in general is some of the best action in the entire saga. Every action sequence in this movie has some level of enjoyment, whether it's because it's visually breathtaking, the fast-paced direction, or the emotional weight behind them. I also really like the fan service in this movie. Now, I will admit that as much as I've enjoyed the Disney-era Star Wars movies, the fan service is so invasive and in your face that it does become a little annoying at points. In The Last Jedi, the fan service is still there, but it's not there just for the sake of fan service. There's a great moment where Luke meets R2 again after years, and R2 shows Luke the message Leia sent asking for Obi-Wan Kenobi's help, and Luke's like, that's a cheap move. It's a great callback that serves to deepen the scene instead of just being like, hey, you remember that? Remember that? Do you remember that? I also loved seeing Yoda again. I love drunk Yoda that is super wise, powerful, and wizard-like, that also comes across as a crackhead. And Frank Oz does a terrific job voicing Yoda. That said, I love that scene not just because Yoda, of all people, is basically giving Luke the wake-up call he needs, but also because of how it conveys the idea of passing the torch to someone else, and how people learn from those who come before. Yoda literally says, we are what they grow beyond. That is the burden of all masters. And the way I interpreted that was Yoda saying to Luke that apprentices grow, develop, and eventually surpass their masters, and that it's the master's duty to ensure that the apprentices take their place and perhaps even grow beyond that. So when Luke dies, he figuratively passes the baton to Rey to carry on the Jedi legacy and save the galaxy, but also to grow beyond that. So overall, I still love The Last Jedi. It's not a masterpiece. It has some serious pacing issues, some sequences that really don't work for me, inappropriately misplaced humor, and even a couple themes that just feel underdeveloped. But I think there is way more good in this movie than bad. It has a great original vision, it's exciting and unexpected, and has some of the best action in the entire Star Wars franchise. And it positioned characters in a very interesting way that really got me hyped for Episode 9 back in the day. So with all that said, and without any hesitation, Star Wars The Last Jedi gets an 8.7 out of 10. So those are my thoughts on The Last Jedi. I do hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Thank you so much as always for watching. You guys are the absolute best. Before I go though, I would just like to ask you guys, what do you think of The Last Jedi? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's somewhere in the middle? Please leave your thoughts down below in the comments, and I will indeed see you guys in the next one. Hope all you guys are staying safe and washing your hands, and until next time, take care of yourselves, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you always. Bye!